Well, welcome to our first part of our five-part series around kind of cloud adoption, and we're going to step you through some really exciting stuff over the next couple of sessions. Starting off with this very first session, which is all focused on an introduction to the adoption framework. I'll be kind of moderating and working with you over the next couple of sessions that we're delivering with some trusty advisors and some help from others. But as we go through this, I want us to kind of just think about how this will kind of continue to build on each other. So as we're starting off today with the overview, we will get into further sessions in part 2 where we start talking about the deeper technical aspects of building out your landing zone, what that means. We'll talk about kind of some of the operating principles, how do we run in the cloud, and how do we manage the assets that we have. As we get down into part 4, we'll talk a lot about kind of driving agility and how to kind of drive DevOps and building this out and getting our hands dirty on that front. And then ultimately, we'll kind of end off with talking about different architecture patterns. And so you'll see as we go through this today in this introductory session, we'll be touching on each one of these areas, giving you a bit of a snippet and a view into the different aspects and elements of the adoption framework and how we can actually help you build and drive towards the right outcomes for your cloud environment. By way of introduction, my name is Wayne Mayer. I have been in Microsoft for close on 2 decades. I've been doing a lot of the kind of cloud adoption work over the last 4 years, and actually working directly with customers and taking kind of those learnings and reinstilling this back into the content, into the assets, and really kind of taking some of the guidance that we've built and being able to kind of make that more pervasive across our customers. The agenda for today is, we're going to keep this. I'm going to keep this flowing, and we're going to keep it moving, and we'll unpack quite a few things here. But I want to start off with a story and an analogy, because I feel like for those that are just starting this cloud journey, you might be thinking about cloud in one way, and we want to try to show kind of all the various aspects of cloud and how it comes together. There are going to be some of you that are deeply technical and already well on this path, and bear with us as we go through this. I think we kind of wanted to make sure that we're hitting kind of all audiences. We're going to then unpack the adoption framework. I think what we've built in terms of the framework really helps solidify and get the questions answered, especially those questions that you don't know you need to ask. And so you'll see as we kind of unpack this and break it down, kind of some of the critical components, not only addressing just the technical aspects, but also the business side. I'm going to take you on a little bit of a journey where we can kind of ideate together. We'll look at a scenario of self-service and how do we build out this environment, and I'll kind of give you a quick demo. And so think about kind of this as a very simple example, that you could potentially add out, and I'll talk a little bit about where we can change some of the technology up that we're utilizing. But the idea here is really to show you what's kind of slightly possible, and these are not overly complex solutions that you're putting in place. I mean, for me, I think I'm not a coder, but this is something that I probably built within a morning, maybe a day, and so it's really not very difficult. I'm going to take you through the tools and the references, make sure we can walk you through those so you can kind of get a flow around how the whole adoption framework really comes together, and then leave you with a couple of key links that I leave with every single customer, saying these are the 2 things that I think you need to remember. So let's dive right in. These are some kind of funky looking slides, but I want you to kind of just follow me in the story and think about yourself actually going out and building a home or buying a home. I think there's really some decisions that you're going to go through, and we'll call these phases to livability of this home. And so when you go and you say, hey, I'm going to build a new house, there are some decision criteria. Where do you want to build it? What do you need? What is the cost of this home? Kind of, hey, do taxes come into it? So if I'm living in one part of the country, are the tax rates different to another part? And kind of how does that impact me? What does the growth of this particular house look like? Am I going to continue to be a single person, or am I looking to grow a family, or do I have a family? Am I looking to expand that family? What kind of growth do I need? Think about the environment, the proximity to services that you want, the lifestyle that you're wanting to lead. There's a bunch of decisions that go in there, and you kind of land on a place and you say, you know what, this particular area kind of really suits us well in terms of our lifestyle and what we're looking for. You then go in and you kind of sit down with your architect and you start to build up a plan. You start to figure out like how many rooms do we need? What is the direction of this house in terms of facing? Do I want it to be, north facing, south facing, east facing, and so on? What kind of luxuries and features do I want in this home? And then ultimately, it comes down to what can I afford right now? So I may build this kind of elaborate plan, but I'm going to have to build it within a budget of what I can afford. Once you've got your plan, you kind of sit down with your contractor. Your contractor now starts building out that environment and that platform. And I think many times we see customers going down this path of where, and I'll kind of talk to the Azure scenario in a second, where they start throwing these kind of buildings out there and starting putting applications out without having a well-defined foundation. And so we've got to think about these foundations that we establish, because this is where we start connecting our services, water, electricity, your sewage lines, and kind of all of these pieces, connectivity and TV connections and so on. So you want to make sure that all of these things are plugged in at the foundation. Then you have this inspector that comes in, signs off and says, hey, this foundation is pretty solid, it's going to stand, let's move on. And then your contractor will move into the next phase, which is all about kind of building out those various rooms and building the house to the plan that you defined. But we know, like within life, life changes and evolves, and we're never going to be stuck with that one house. And there's going to be parts of that house we're going to say, hey, we need to kind of add some new features. And so maybe I want to add some automation. Maybe I want to kind of change and remodel the kitchen. I want to update it and renovate it. I might have that extension that I need to go out and build. And so either an in-law moves in with you, or you have a child that kind of moves out and goes to college, and maybe you have a new child coming in, and so on and so forth. And so you kind of have to think about, how's this environment going to change and extend? And then, hey, I may also turn around and say, ultimately, I need to, I love this home, but I also want to have an extended, another place to go, which is kind of this holiday home. And so as you think about this in the context of your cloud provider and your cloud environment, well, it's down to kind of like the same sort of thing. I need a cloud. What is the relationship? Who's the partner? Who's the customer? Who's the provider I'm going to use? What are the capabilities that they offer and the costs and so on? You go in and you build your plan, and that plan really kind of outlines the motivations and what am I trying to build and what am I trying to achieve? And, as I kind of look at the 1, 2, 3, or that horizon 1, 2, 3, how does that actually work, and kind of where do I see myself being in 3, 4, 5 years time with this cloud provider? What are the skills that I need, and kind of thinking then about the backlog of work that I have right now that I want to put into that plan. Once you've got that established and you've got your plan bedded down, you now go into building out that landing zone and think about the environment that you're going to start putting all this backlog of work and these applications that you've identified. You need a place to be able to land them. And so connectivity, security, management, backup, and business continuity. So you want to think about all of those things. You want to think about identity and RBAC and so on and so forth. And so your landing zone really becomes that place that says, I've now got this grounded environment that is governed and compliant, meeting the needs and the requirements that I have as a business to support that plan that I had identified. And then once again, you go in and you start building out those environments and those workloads. And I'll go back to the kind of example of what I used earlier on, is where we get many times where customers start putting workloads out there without really validating and vetting that landing zone is well established and well bedded down. And I kind of refer to that as building kitchens in the forest, right? So you go out and you just put something out into the wild without having kind of the services and the connectivity, and then you can make it happen, but it's not as easy as what as it should be. And so sometimes you may find that you got security gaps and exposure in those particular apps. And so as we go through this process of really building out that landing zone, it's a well-bedded, well-sound landing zone environment. And you can then start to put those workloads and start to put those rooms in place to kind of build out that environment that you're looking for. And as life changes, business also changes. And so you may want to, in time, go out and build new capabilities. And so today, I may have done something by moving data up into my cloud environment. But with that data that I've got up there, I want to do something interesting with it. I might want to do some kind of machine learning. I want to kind of utilize that data in a different way. I may want to think about expanding the way that I service customers, and I can use set up bots to do that. Or do I, as a marketing person, do I kind of use new capabilities where I can do sentiment analysis, utilizing some of these built-in services? And so you want to add new capabilities to what you do in your business, in your line of business today. We want to expand our portfolio. We may have started out by 1 to 10 new interesting applications or new applications that we're building, but we're going to rapidly start looking to expand. And this may mean that we need to either drop out another landing zone. We may need to expand out our landing zones. We may need to kind of think about, what is that portfolio of, and what do I need to support? Do I have the right guardrails and governance in place to support that? And you may also think about M&As and acquisitions and growth of that environment. And so, the environment will change and ebb and flow, but you've got that base fundamentals, the base practices in place. So what does this all mean for the adoption framework? We've been on this journey for the last 4 years or so in terms of building out the adoption framework. And we've taken, hundreds of customers' feedback into how we've built this, and really kind of focused on trying to help customers through this entire process, from the people side, the process side, right through to actual technology. And I'm going to say again, time and time again, the technology piece is generally the easiest piece to kind of cover off. The hardest part about cloud adoption is all on the people process side. That transformation is typically very hard because there is a different style of work that we actually bring into when we start bringing cloud into play. There's two ways we can think about cloud. One is we can think about it as the data center in the sky, the place where we can just put stuff. The other way is really making it transformative to the way that we work. And we can actually drive agility, we can drive simplicity, we can actually empower users within our businesses to actually go out and create and ideate in this cloud environment. But we do that in a compliant, governed way. And so I think as we think through these different styles of, hey, is IT still going to be the centralized figure or the body that's going to be provisioning things, or are we going to empower our users to be able to self-serve and create? I think we have to balance that as we go through some of these decisions. The cloud adoption framework, as I said, kind of covers people, process, technology. What we've done over the years is we've actually really built this up, not just from a documentation, and I think our documentation started off, I believe we had like 300, 400 pages. I think there was roughly 1,700 pages of content to support this. This is not a measure of success to say, hey, this thing's great because it's got so many pages. We just know that cloud adoption is hard. And so we're really consistently updating and making sure that we keep this fresh and keep it current based on customers' needs and feedback. And I'll give you an example later on. I'll show you how we've recently gone ahead and updated to include things around sustainability. And so when we start to measure business outcomes, not only is it fiscal outcomes and efficiency outcomes, hey, we can now start to measure, help you kind of provide guidance around how do you measure things like sustainability. We've also incorporated things like OKRs and measuring, driving accountability and alignment across your organization. And so we'll continue to add and evolve in the content to ensure that you have the latest and greatest of what we're seeing in the industry, as well as across different customers. With that, we're going to build out templates, we build out best practices and scenarios, and I'm going to walk you through some of those scenarios. And I think it's really, really exciting to see some of the new stuff that's coming down the line, and it's extremely, extremely powerful. Just in terms of helping customers kind of drive that velocity that they need. I can't stress enough how important this notion of balance is. I think the desire for what we see from many customers is saying, hey, we want to move to cloud. The challenge is like, we've got a lot of technical debt. How do we do this in a way and in a structured way that really helps us drive the right velocity? How do we balance the needs and demands of the business with IT's desire? How do we balance the needs and demands of finance in terms of moving towards an OpEx-based model from a CapEx-based model, if that's a need that you need to get to? And so all of these things come into play. And so we also have to balance the skills of individuals. And so we can talk about get to the cloud, go forth and do these, run these services up there. But if the technical folk have not come along on that journey and are unable to kind of put the stuff in place, we're going to have to balance it. We're going to have to balance some of that. And so we're going to keep this in mind as we go through this, and especially as we go through this 5-part series. There's going to be options, options for us to accelerate a little quicker, and there's going to be options for us to say, hey, we can run these things. Doesn't have to be all or nothing. We've got a phenomenal story when it comes to hybrid, when it comes to not just you're all in. It's not just VMs. It's not just PaaS-based services. There's a lot of decision factors that we can take into deciding how we move forward. And so that notion of balance is really, really critical. And so let me kind of jump right in and just unpack the adoption framework for you. And I think this is pretty much the amount of slides that I'm going to take. There's a lot more that we'll be covering off over the coming weeks. After this, we're going to jump in and we're going to do kind of some show and tell, and we're going to kind of talk through and ideate and and leave you with some real tangible things to go after. But as we start this journey, there's really three conversations that we want to try to lead, that we want to try and tee up. I did mention the 1,700 pages, all of that back ends, this entire graphic. And so it'll take a little bit of time for us to kind of walk through all of these things, but I truly want to make sure that we understand the process and the journey that we're on. The first thing that I want to kind of call out, cloud is a model, not just a place. And so as I talk to the adoption framework, think about it in the context of the model. How will my business change, and how will my teams change, and how will my structure change in terms of truly going out and actually adopting cloud in the way that actually it is intended to drive that agility and get to market quicker. Even as at Microsoft, we've actually gone through this journey of adopting cloud kind of mentality and cloud building. We were always a 3 to 5 year cadence company where we built our products and we released them, and we're now 30, 60, 90 day cadence. And so that has needed us to kind of make some internal changes around how we develop and how we put products out into market. And so I want to kind of just talk through these three pillars very quickly so that you can get some context. Now, it's not necessarily a sequential left to right or from business to workload conversation. I'll talk to it in that way, but you may be in different parts of this of the adoption journey, and it is modular in a way that you can pick and choose. The business conversation usually focused around kind of the CCOE, the Cloud Center of Excellence. If you don't have a Cloud Center of Excellence, it's that strategy team. If you don't have a strategy team, it's usually your cloud leaders and business leaders. They're the folk that are generally most interested in getting involved in this part of the conversation. I will kind of be very transparent. If we're talking to enterprise architects and security people on these topics, they generally kind of start pushing and saying, hey, when are we going to start touching the technology? This is very much a people process conversation. We talk about motivations. Why are we moving to cloud? What are the short-term, long-term, medium-term motivations that are driving us? We want to make sure we figure out those business outcomes. How are we measuring impact and success, and how will cloud kind of change the way that we can deliver services to those end customers that we're working with? We actually kind of think about business justification here and projects. So in this whole top part of it, we want to make sure that we establish some rigor and a system by which we can evaluate the viability of cloud projects. When I'm going to put something up into the cloud, how's it being costed? How's it going to be operated? Does it meet the predetermined standards that the strategy team or the cloud business team have actually put out there? We want to have a core set of principles that enables us to do that. And so just that business justification, it's part of the cloud adoption framework. It gives you some guidance and things to think about as we start building out these apps. The second critical part of the business conversation is all around the estate. When we embark on this journey, we want to understand what do we have today. So if I've got 1,000 line of business applications in my organization today, what are those applications doing and what are their interdependencies? And so when I talk about just moving a set of VMs from on-premise to cloud, what is the impact for all the kind of downstream applications that may be depending on that? And so just understanding that digital estate and rationalizing what's in that digital estate is really, really critical. I think we have to have a really clear line of sight into what the organization, how the organization is structured and how the organization operates. This is probably the area that I spend the most amount of time with customers, just talking about the adoption framework, because that organizational alignment is absolutely key. It's the place that actually many customers stumble. It's the place that we can get hung up and not drive towards the agility that we're looking for. And so I think just getting very clear on the types of roles and the capabilities and how we should be thinking about evolving those roles of individuals in our organization is key. So one example here is you'll typically have teams in kind of like you'll have security teams, identity teams, networking teams, all defining different sets of rules around how do we access data, what are the rules about kind of utilizing data, and so on. As we think about the new, as we think about getting into these new style roles and these capabilities that we want to build, we may want to think about a governance capability. And that governance capability actually has a collection of people, it's not just security and identity who are kind of defining their sets of rules, but you have security, identity, finance, you have IT, enterprise architects, all coming together in a way that you can actually build out these sets of rules so that there is commonality and there's understanding across these groups. But we also include business in that so that the business feel like they're participants within driving towards the right outcomes from a governance perspective. Similarly, we talk about things like automation capabilities. As we want to get into the cloud, we really want to try and automate as much as possible. And so that may mean that we're going to actually have to have a capability in the organization that is responsible for code, making sure that we have common sets of patterns, that is actually stored and saved up in a common repository that any kind of developer or a line of business application owner can actually call on to leverage when they need. As we go through this, making sure that we have a really clear eye on the skills plan. There's going to be new skills that we're going to have to build within organizations, and there's skills that we're going to have to evolve. And so just making sure that skills plan is key. Looking at the new style roles that we will have, I think will really help us kind of drive towards that agility that is required. And then ultimately, as we start to, we want to make sure that all of this is documented into a very well-defined cloud adoption plan. That adoption plan, documented in whatever form. We've got templates out here within the adoption framework. I'm not hung up on the template or how that gets rendered, but I think it's important to be able to cover off that adoption plan and have a stated intent of principles, teams, responsibilities, ownership, and accountability that you can actually surface up, and that, as well as then a backlog of work and those projects that we're going after, because what that does is that then keeps that current and you can keep it updated on a regular cadence. And when you have your CCOE meeting or your strategy team meeting on that specific cadence, they should be reviewing that plan and making sure that we're on track. So now we've defined the plan, we've kind of defined the business side, pretty hard, gnarly piece to kind of get through. Now we start getting into the stuff which is really all around kind of defining the platform. Think about that landing zone. What is the connectivity that we need? What is our IP schema? The range of IP addresses that we're going to need? How do we think about our storage of data? Where does that reside? We may need to, at this point, start thinking about data centers that we want to be present in. We want to look at identity and RBAC. How do we connect up with, if we're using Office 365, what is our identity provider? So there's a range of different aspects that we bring together here when we start thinking about that landing zone. And that landing zone gives us the ability to start putting some sort of guardrails and some sort of controls in place. We then expand that with the governance narrative, and the governance kind of execution on this really helps us look at what are the compliance requirements that we have to meet. Do we need to conform to CIS or NIST or PCI or ISO, whichever regulatory compliance or regulatory framework that you need to adhere to? How do we take that and then apply that into the right subscriptions, to the right management groups, so that we have that uniformity and we have policy-based application of this governance? And so as we start to move down this path and we use kind of Azure DevOps, or we're giving users the ability to self-serve, we're not concerned about breakages in the system, because we're going to allow Azure, we kind of put it into place so that we drive the policy at the platform level, so that people can create what they need to create, but they also can't break out of the bounds of the systems that we put in place. It also gives us the ability to now kind of do things like operational reporting and management and ongoing operations, because we've got the right the right metadata is applied. We've got the right rules associated to specific management groups. We can kind of give people the right access into viewing data that is important to them, and that could cost them financial data and so on, and operational data. So now we've got our platform established. So think about this in the analogy that I gave. You've got your foundation, it's signed off, it's looking good. All right, now we can go in and start building our rooms. And those rooms are kind of all those workloads. And whether you're going to be taking sets of workloads and just migrating, because those are VMs or maybe based on the motivation that you've defined within your business plan, you've actually built out that you need to migrate something, or whether your business plan has said, hey, we've got this legacy application that we want to re-architect and rebuild into more cloud native technology, we might want to innovate and build something new. And so we've got lots of great best practices and examples of what those types of applications look like with associated reference architectures, which I'll take you through in a minute. But we can actually take any one of these types of scenarios and start to surface up and say, these are the decisions that you've got to go through as you start thinking about these applications. We've built a really robust management methodology within the adoption framework, and the management methodology gives us the opportunity to do the right operational baselining, be able to monitor and see any kind of violations that are happening across our environment. If there is anything that needs to be evolved or needs to be improved upon, we can use our management kind of console and our management tooling to be able to expose errors and expose potential pitfalls and places that we can improve upon. With that, it's not only about kind of reactive, but also utilizing some of the native tools that we built in. And so we'll talk later on kind of through the 5-part series around things like Azure Advisor, what we're doing with Security Center and Sentinel, kind of both on security alerting, but also on things like operational improvement. And so things like Advisor, having a tool built into the platform that is informing us of places to potentially improve on cost optimization, fixing security gaps, looking at how we can improve reliability, and so on and so forth. And then finally, kind of part of the story and this narrative that has evolved over the last year or so is this well-architected methodology. And this methodology really gives us the opportunity to look at specific workloads individually that have been migrated or moved up into Azure or built in Azure, where we can actually now start to evaluate these workloads and look at them from an architecture robustness perspective. And so I can start to evaluate now, how well are they performing? Are they reliable? What happens from are there ways that I can cost optimize that application? And we know that when we architect new apps or we put things out into the cloud for the first time, if it's a VM, we generally over provision and oversize those. And so this is a good forcing function to come back and say, how are we reviewing and revising what we've got running? And so there's lots of rich guidance built into the adoption framework and the well-architected methodology to try and help customers go down this path to truly run these enterprise grade and enterprise scale environments that are secure, reliable, and optimized. So really robust, really, really powerful. I'm a huge fan, kind of do this day in and day out. I don't ever get bored of kind of talking about this because it meets pretty much every single customer where they're at, whether you have been running in Azure for the last 7, 8, 9 years, or whether you are brand new. The adoption framework is absolutely perfect for you where you're at today. And it is modular, picking and choosing the places and the pieces of it that actually that are relevant. So I'm going to kind of just switch gears for a minute. I've walked you through all of this. I've given you the theory and the background. We're going to spend a bit of time going in and actually doing what we call, let's do the show and tell stuff. And so I want to kind of just ideate and just imagine for a minute a scenario where you're a CCOE, you've built up an environment, you want to make sure that you provide an environment out to your end users where they can actually go and build specific instances of different applications by themselves. And so we want to create consistency and environment where I, as IT, don't want to be the person that's sitting provisioning things. That's not interesting for me. I want to be looking forward and helping see new ways that I can drive interesting, changes to the business, or places where I can actually drive profits for the business, not necessarily just be a cost where I'm actually where I'm monitoring. And that's not to say IT is just a cost, but I want to start thinking a bit more proactively around this. I want to look at how do I build out, self-service, make sure that this is governed from the outset. I shouldn't have to worry when somebody creates something that it's not going to be governed or secure. I want to make sure that I really drive towards an agile environment that takes that allows these users on their own time to be able to go out and provision work. And then ultimately, it has to be compliant. All right, and so I'm gonna spend a little bit of time going through this, and I've created a very simple application and a flow really. Some of you may have seen this before. We've posted it we've posted it out before in social channels, but I'm going to kind of do it again because I think it really lends itself well to kind of just ideating and seeing what's possible. Now, for this particular demo, I'm doing just an office form, which is then going to be back-ended by a Power Automate process, which has kind of got my logic in it that says once the form gets received, I'm going to go ahead and kind of kick off some processes in Azure DevOps and so on and so forth. So it's pretty straightforward. This could quite easily be replaced with Power Apps. So you could do a logic app in the back end that's actually doing the process flow. It could be an Excel sheet that you fill in and kind of logic app picks it up and kind of processes. It could be just a JSON file that we use and monitor. Could be a straight web front end. So there's multiple front ends into something like this. I've used forms because I'm going for the low code, no code kind of scenario. So I've created a new application. I'm going to give the name to my app. I'm going to use myself as the application owner and the approval. I'm putting in kind of cost center details because I want to be able to track the cost of this app. There's a couple of key things that are defined as important from, that my CCOE kind of defined as critical for every single application that gets created. I've got to make sure I capture business impact information. I've got to capture SLA information. My team have also, and the reason why we're doing this is for operational purposes. So if I do something that is high business impact, I'm going to put it into a slightly different landing zone. I may have a completely different set of rules associated to it. If I create something as a high service level, I need a high response time. I'm not going to do just a small size VMs or small kind of web app. I'm going to kind of really scale this up. I really need this to be scalable, and I can set those different parameters within the backend when I build this out. So I'm using this for kind of just as indicators on sizing and how do I provision. It could be multiple other things that you look at. What we have done is I've gone ahead and created a couple of patterns here of what is important for my business, right? And so I may have a database that I allow people to go out and create, and that database is just a standard MySQL database on Azure and once again, it will change on the sizing depending on the service level and the business impact. We're going to go ahead and just provision a web app today, just because that's probably the quickest, easiest thing to do. I could go out and create a machine learning workspace. I could do IoT. I could a VM. I could kind of create a sentiment analysis model for my marketing team. And so if my marketing team were running a new campaign, we could say, hey, here's how you go and provision this through this front end, create sentiment analysis, put in a parameter, and what is the thing that you're looking for in terms of the sentiments that you want to track, which particular platform do you want to track on, and we could go and automatically create and provision that using kind of some JSON script in the background. But so I'm going to create this web app. I only give my users the ability to create an East US and West US. That is, we could obfuscate all of that and just kind of say, hey, everything gets created, and so you don't give them the option. And then I'm just going to go out and give a reason for this as well. So what's going to happen here is I'm going to hit submit on this form. There's a couple of things that are going to go on. One is I'm actually going to get an email, which will come through to me. But I'm also going to use the Teams integration. And so I've actually got an approval that's come through in Teams that I can see now. It'll show me my different requests that have come in, and I can say, hey, here's my project. Let's go ahead. I'm going to hit approve on this thing. All goodness, and my project is now being approved. And so what's happening now is it's going to go into my DevOps environment, and it will start creating out these particular environments. So let me quickly show you the email that I received when it was approved. Actually, I've customized. Sorry, it's already gone. But it would have customized the language, which was, hey, we're going to create a resource group. We're going to create a storage account. We're going to create this file share with this web app. We're also going to go out and create. We'll create the web app for you, and you'll see that these are currently in flight. So now it's creating the resource group, and it'll kick off and create the web app in a minute. And so resource group is created. It's now kicking off the next piece, which is a storage account. And if I jump into my resource group here, I'll see in a minute or two when I refresh, it'll have my kind of this new resource group will be created. We'll let that refresh in a minute. And then what will happen is that they'll start provisioning these new applications. And so now in a very easy manner, I've actually gone ahead and created my new application. There it is, new app RG, with all the right tags, kind of all the compliance and governance in place. And you can start to think about how you can structure more of this stuff where we can actually create the service catalog for our environments and for our, our business users to say, here's things that we've signed off as being critical that you can go out and create. And they will have the ability just within a self-service portal to select it, and it has the right tagging and so on from an operational perspective. And so it's all established and created. And so in a minute or two, once these all get created, we'll get this new app up and running. And within 5 to 10 minutes, you've got a web app that's ready for a developer to go out and start dropping code in. And so I use that as an example to show what is possible. It's a very simple example of creating a service catalog, forms, a little bit of PowerShell script, in my case, calling on some templates, automating it through kind of Azure DevOps using CI/CD, and the approval process is built within kind of, I've integrated some Teams aspects into that, as well as kind of Office and SharePoint as well, because I'll write it back into a SharePoint list. And so there's my app. And if you can go into this app now, you'll see that this app is absolutely live. If you click this link, and developer is now ready to get going on that particular on building out and coding into that. So really, really powerful scenarios that we can go out and automate in our environments, and not terribly difficult to create. So I kind of like to use that example just because I think it gives folk an idea of what's possible in a very simplistic way. So let's kind of move forward a bit, and I know that we've been going for about 40 minutes. I wanted to spend a little bit of time just talking through the adoption framework, because ultimately, as you think about this onboarding into Azure, we want to try and help you structure your approach, make sure we're doing these things in the right way. We're going to get into a lot more detail over the next four sessions, where we'll start to break out things like your landing zones. We'll start to break out how we think about security. We'll break out how we look at building applications and patterns and so on. And I'll show you in the interim where some of these things are. So 2 key links that keep in mind. This very top one, aka.ms/adopt, great place to land. I use this on a daily basis. So let me jump in and kind of give you a quick walkthrough of the adoption framework kind of portal, as it were. There's a couple of things that really stand out for me here. One is when I jump in, the first place that I go is just exploring the framework. This will take us into the docs content, and I'll jump into that in a minute. The other place is getting started. So if you were new to this process and you weren't quite sure on what you should be reading, what you should be looking at, there's a couple of things that I would kind of recommend that you take a look at. One is looking at this Cloud Journey Tracker. There's a quick assessment that you can come in and do. As it's about 15 minutes, where it'll start to give you give you some direction on areas to go and focus on within the adoption framework. Mentioned already, there's 1,700 pages. As much as I'd love everybody to read all 1,700 pages, I'm a realist, and so I think you're going to kind of self-select the things that are important. And so as we go through this particular Cloud Journey Tracker is a good starting point just to kind of help orient you. If you have a very specific application that you're already thinking about migrating, here's the Strategic Migration Assessment and Readiness Tool. Also about a 10-minute exercise where you can kind of step through. I know it's very similar to the Cloud Journey Tracker, but it'll also give you some documents and areas to go and actually evaluate within the adoption framework content. Next, we'll start looking at things like your governance benchmark. If you've been in Azure for a while and you're trying to understand what your current gaps are within governance, this is a great 30-minute rapid fire assessment that you can walk through, and it will give you a bar chart of what your desired state is versus your current state. And there's a gap that they'll say like, hey, we think you should focus more on cost management, on security, on identity, and so on and so forth. For those applications that are currently running, if you've got applications running in Azure today, this is a great place to go and actually to kickstart and run an architecture review, 20-minute review of a specific application as well, where you can start to get direction and guidance on what are the pieces of that application that you want to look at. And so as you evaluate an application across these five disciplines, it may pop up and say things like, this application should probably have you should do a security review on it, or you should be able to look at it from a cost perspective because you've under provisioned or you under invested in certain areas. So those are some interesting kind of assessments which I would definitely encourage you to start looking at as you go. And then the developer velocity index is really kind of looking at, what is your developer readiness within your organization as well. And so a rapid fire kind of assessment on that front. So this assessment platform is really evolving and kind of it's super powerful. And it's a place that I think if you go in and self-serve, really, really useful. Some other interesting things around here, we'd encourage you to kind of take a read through things like the enterprise scale, and I'll get into that in a little bit more. Here's some views around the assessment categories. And so when you start looking at your cloud journey assessments, you get these various scores. That's the output of the governance assessment, and this is an output of the well-architected assessment. We've actually bought rights to a book, and so this was kind of written by Dan Scarf, and it's a fantastic read, an ebook, just kind of how to run and operate within the cloud as well. So feel free to go and actually leverage that. So place that I usually go, jump straight into exploring the framework. There's a bunch of tools and templates that you can jump into. These are also referenced within the TOC, but I'll step you through very quickly. You'll see that everything kind of aligns up to that initial schematic that I gave of strategy, plan, ready, govern, adopt. There is the organize in there, and I'll spend a bit of time on that in a minute just to kind of help you understand kind of where everything fits in. But these two phases, the strategy and plan, this is all about getting ready for building out that adoption plan. So guidance on what your organization alignment should look like, building out your skills plan, thinking about your cloud adoption plan, and then as well as we've even got tools within Azure DevOps, which I'll show you in a minute as well, which kind of help you kind of get that plan moving. Within the ready phase, the Azure Setup Guide gives you a lot of great resources in terms of how to organize, what should the environment look like. If you're beyond all of that and you're trying to get into the landing zone piece, which we will cover off in some of the next sessions, we've got some amazing new assets that have come in through the enterprise scale initiative that has been built. And so this is where I spoke about kind of building out policy and having some rich architecture and design guides around kind of your landing zone. We've built all of that in, so it's some easy things for you to go out and look at to say, hey, what should my architecture or my environment look like? How should I be building this? And I'll give you a quick sneak preview into, we've actually even built three example implementations for landing zones, which you can get to through GitHub, or you could deploy directly to Azure from here. And so there's more to be covered on that in the upcoming sessions. So really, really powerful. I'm a huge fan of what's been built within the landing zone piece. As we jump into kind of the adoption side and innovation side, built out a bunch of guidance around how do we deal with specific workloads. So if I was going to be doing a Windows Server rehost, and kind of moving Windows apps on to Azure VMs, how would I do that? If I was going to be taking Linux and kind of moving that forward, or any kind of open source platform, I recently put something in LinkedIn around what we've done within Moodle. And what's cool here is that we've actually got a full-blown kind of architecture and design, which you can then go and from here directly deploy to Azure, which is pretty cool. So on this kind of small, medium, large, you can actually go and deploy a Moodle environment directly to Azure. So that was pretty exciting when I saw that come through. So you're doing SAP, so on and so forth. Also a lot of focus on some of the hybrid work that we're doing, kind of how do we think about Azure Stack in this space. And I'll show you something like we've got around building out kind of hybrid networks as well. So loads of good migration scenarios built in. On the innovation side, if you jump into the innovation side and some of the scenarios we've got here, we've actually built out a bunch of best practices, whether it be using apps, and if you've got a bunch of citizen developers, how do we use Power Apps? Or if you were going to be using various devices and kind of infusing intelligence into these devices. How do we do things, computer vision and translating text in real time, blah, blah, blah. So there's a bunch of neat stuff here, and I've got a lot of things that we can kind of, we can cover off, and I don't want to read all this for you. And then ultimately, what does microservices architecture look like? How do we think about containers in our environment? Take a read through and just giving you kind of that kickstart into building out some of those environments as well. So super pumped about this. Oh, the one piece that I'm going to show you here is we've actually done some work around around kind of knowledge mining, and you'll see when I jump into the Azure DevOps environment, we've actually built out a pattern for building out a knowledge mining solution as well. And then lastly, as you go through governance, we've got this very, very robust methodology for governance. And this was something that we released at the very start of the adoption, when we released the adoption framework. We were most ahead on the governance side. It's the area that many customers have kind of struggled with, because we've gone out and we've built our environments, we put things in place, and then we realize, hey, we don't really have the right discipline in place to kind of deal with security or identity, or we haven't really kind of factored in how do we do cost management in our environment today, and so on. And so I think the governance guide is a great way for us to be able to start looking at, hey, what are the kind of security, what are the disciplines that you need for across security, identity, resource, and consistency and cost, where we define specific policy statements, and then we've even got tooling to be able to implement some of these things as well. So rich content on that front. Finally, on the managed side, what are the best practices around managing your environment? How do we do operational fitness reviews and so on? And then lastly, going back to some of the team aspects and the people aspects, is really just looking at how do we kind of manage the structure of that environment. At the start, I said that this was probably one of the more complex parts of cloud adoption, is how do we now structure ourselves to be more cloud aligned? Well, we've got a lot of new capabilities that come into play and that we kind of think about. And so, we've got these structures, and we've got this RACI matrix that has been made available. You can download this in Excel. And then also just finally, kind of how do we think about building our technical skills to support this new organization that we're building? On that front, skilling is something that I talk about Microsoft Learn on a regular basis. I think it's a really, really powerful platform. And something that we spend a lot of time and effort in kind of investing in. You'll see there's some great courses in here. My view is that jump in, go straight into products, look at Azure. If you're just starting, kind of get going on your Azure fundamentals. If you're kind of beyond that, there's loads of different paths that you can actually look into. We've actually even built out a cloud adoption framework course, which is in here, and I'll show you that in a minute. You can actually take courses by role as well. And so if you were a security person or just a data scientist, or just a standard business user, we can come in and you can actually map out a learning path for yourself. And this is all free. And so you can come in and actually do this course, this learning on your own time as well. And so on a cadence that makes sense to you. Here's an example of the Cloud Adoption Framework for Azure course. It's a 50-minute module. There's nine units within that module, and and if you go, and I'll walk you through everything that we've kind of spoken about, and you can kind of do some testing as test outs as well, and that just to kind of some simple knowledge checks. So I'm a big fan of what we've got within the Azure platform. And then finally, the thing that I want to show you as one of the last tools that have been created, and we'll get into a lot of this at a later stage, is through what we call the Azure DevOps generator. And so if you look on this is the link here that we've kind of surfaced up. So as you start working through your environment and you start thinking about, hey, I've got my plan, I've built my platform, and I've put my landing zone in place. How do I think about my different workloads and applications that I want to use? So what we've done is we've actually started to create a series of these different patterns. And these patterns we're starting to surface up through the adoption framework. You'll see today we've got a governance readiness pattern. That one will move underneath here. We've got some WBD guidance, which is in place as well. We've got a whole Windows Virtual Desktop project that you can run. These two, the Cloud Adoption Plan and the Strategy Plan Ready Gov, they are pretty detailed projects for actually defining your cloud adoption plan. aligned to the adoption framework kind of process and methodology. And then I mentioned knowledge mining earlier. We've actually got a full-blown knowledge mining project that if you go and deploy that into your own kind of Azure DevOps organization, and I will just bring that up for you very quickly, you'll see that you actually can now jump in and see all the work items that are needed with it, that you need to follow in order to build out that knowledge mining solution. So here, kind of, there's two primary epics, and then we've got a couple of features and user stories, and then you'll see underneath this, like, hey, here's some tutorials that you can go through. We've even pulled in some sample code of this knowledge mining app in GitHub. And there'll be a lot more of these types of projects and patterns that we'll kind of create so that you can actually go out and utilize them when you're stepping through your adoption. And so whether it be a migration, innovation, or even if you're just building out your plan, we've got this all done. Each one of these, as you walk through this, you'll see each area has these deep links into different aspects. And if you were kind of leading this project, you could now go and say, hey, I'm going to kind of assign this to the security team. Let's make sure that they address all of it. And then you can if you were going to go and build code for it, you can throw it into the repo and you incorporate that into your pipelines for releases and so on and so forth. So lots of goodness coming out of these DevOps projects, but it's all intended to try and help simplify and streamline that process that you're going to go through when you start building applications. And so I would encourage you to kind of take a look through some of the other examples that we've got. Here's some DevOps Labs kind of examples. And there's also some prepackaged, really cool kind of little, mini applications. So if you wanted to kind of create there was a mini app around a health clinic or a smart hotel, and so on. These are prepackaged as well that you can actually go and leverage to play around with and to familiarize yourselves with. So some really, really neat stuff that's been incorporated all underneath the adoption framework. So with that, I know we've covered off a lot, and there will be a lot more that we'll cover as we go through this. I hope you've seen that the adoption framework not only is just a bunch of content sitting there, but there's tools and resources as well that you can use. There's learning paths that you can go on. There's various patterns that we've built to kind of bring this all together. But this is intended to give you a structure that as you're going through your adoption journey and you're looking to bring kind of applications from on-premise to cloud, or even in a hybrid scenario, you can utilize the adoption framework to kind of help guide you through that and use that as your reference guide to look at areas for things like deep technical decisions that need to be made, and that's all available within the adoption framework. So over the next couple of sessions, 2, 3, 4, and 5, we'll start to unpack this in a bit more detail, and we'll really kind of go in and start showing you how to build this through these different kind of show and tell type models. Thank you very much for spending time, and look forward to seeing you soon.